The first Sunday after my wedding, I was 19, sitting at my mother-in-law's kitchen table with my hands folded in my lap, waiting for her to tell me what to do. She did not look at me. She set a wooden spoon down on the counter without a sound, then walked past my chair, pressed 2 fingers hard into my shoulder, and whispered 3 words in Pennsylvania Dutch that I had never once heard spoken to a grown woman. My face burned. I did not yet understand what those words meant. But I understood her fingers. I understood the pressure of them, and I understood even then that something had just begun, something I would not be permitted to refuse. That was the first Sunday. 623 more would follow. Before I tell you what she did, and what 12 years of Sundays can do to a woman who is never allowed to say no, let me introduce myself. My name is Anna. I am 83 years old. I was raised Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, and I lived as an Amish wife for 41 years before I finally left at 60. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where women like me finally say out loud what we were taught to carry in silence. If you want the truth from someone who lived a full life inside that world, subscribe and tap the like button. And tell me in the comments where are you watching from and had you ever heard the word Schwiegermutter before today? It means mother-in-law. In my world that word carried more weight than you could imagine. Let me explain something it took me 40 years to fully understand. When a young Amish woman marries, she doesn't simply gain a husband, she is absorbed into a household older than she is, built on rules she never wrote and could never rewrite. In my community, the youngest son inherited the family farm, and his bride moved into what we called the Großdaddy house, the small home attached to the main one where the parents retired. My husband Eli was the youngest son, so from the very first day of our marriage, his mother Lydia lived 20 steps from my kitchen door. 20 steps. I counted them every Sunday for 12 years. Sunday was the axis our whole world turned on. Church in the morning, 3 hours on backless wooden benches. Then the shared meal. Then, in the afternoon, while other families scattered home, the daughters-in-law walked to their mothers-in-law's kitchens. Nobody had ever written this rule down, nobody needed to. It was simply the shape the week took. The young wife arrived and offered herself up for what the older women called unterweisung instruction. Instruction is a gentle-sounding word. What actually happened in that kitchen was not gentle at all. That first Sunday, after the fingers on my shoulder, Lydia set a basket of potatoes in front of me and told me to peel them. I had been peeling potatoes since I was 6 years old. I picked up the knife and began. She watched for less than a minute, then took the knife from my hand, set it down, and struck the back of my wrist hard enough to leave a mark. "Too thick," she said. "You waste, a wasteful wife shames her husband. Begin again." I began again. She struck my wrist 3 more times that afternoon. By the time Eli came to walk me home that evening, my hand had swollen. He saw it. He said nothing. I said nothing. We walked the 20 steps home without a word, and that night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, telling myself this was simply what marriage asked of a woman. This was the price of becoming good. My own mother had paid it. Her mother before her. A whole line of women stretching back through generations, each one sitting at a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, learning to absorb whatever the older woman decided to deliver. Here is something almost no one outside that world understands. The slaps were never the worst part. They were almost a mercy because they were quick. What came after was so much harder to survive. Lydia would sit me down, pour 2 cups of coffee and begin to talk, 3 hours some Sundays, 4 on others, cataloging everything I'd done wrong that week. How I'd hung Eli's shirts on the line, how I'd greeted the bishop's wife after service. How I carried myself walking to the mailbox. She watched me all week from her window in the Großdaddy house, and every Sunday she presented the full accounting. She forgot nothing. If I cried, she told me tears were Hochmut, pride, the gravest sin a woman could commit. A woman who wept at correction was a woman who thought too highly of herself. So I taught myself not to cry. By the 2nd year, I could sit through 4 hours of correction with a face gone still as carved wood. Lydia approved. She told Eli's father I was finally becoming lehrbar, teachable. I remember that word precisely because it was the same word used for breaking a horse to the harness. It was in the 2nd year that she began touching my hair. This is the part I've told almost no one, not even my own daughter, until very recently. On a Sunday that spring, Lydia decided my prayer cap wasn't pinned correctly. She came around behind my chair, drew the pins out, let my hair fall, and began combing it slowly for nearly an hour. Pull the comb through, stop, pull again. And the whole time she recited everything my own mother had failed to teach me, everything about me that still wasn't a true Amish wife, everything Eli deserved and wasn't getting. Her hands in my hair felt like a claim being staked. That's the only way I can describe it. She was informing me through her fingers that I now belonged to her, not to my mother, not even to myself. It became a weekly ritual, the combing, the murmuring, the slow deliberate possession of a young woman by an older one who had once been possessed the very same way, 40 years before her. Before I go further, I want to tell you about my friend Rebecca. She'd married Eli's cousin 2 years ahead of me and lived on the neighboring farm. In those early bruised, bewildered months of my marriage, Rebecca was the only woman I dared speak honestly with. We met at the fence between our gardens on Monday mornings, pretending to inspect the bean rows while we talked in low voices. Rebecca's mother-in-law, Fanny, didn't slap. Fanny had her own method. Fanny made Rebecca kneel. Every Sunday afternoon for the length of the entire visit, sometimes 4 or 5 hours, Rebecca knelt on the bare kitchen floor while Fanny sat above her in a chair, listing her failures one by one. By her 3rd year of marriage, Rebecca's knees were so damaged she couldn't kneel for prayer at church without weeping. The bishop noticed and asked her husband what was wrong. "Weak knees," he said. That was the end of it. Rebecca told me once, leaning over the bean rows, that she'd started dreaming of running. Not running away, just running down some long empty road. Nothing in her hands, no one waiting anywhere at the end of it. She said the dream left her feeling guilty for a week afterward. I told her I had the same dream. We never spoke of it again. In my 5th year of marriage, I gave birth to my first son, Samuel. I told myself, foolishly, that motherhood would change something between Lydia and me, that we were both mothers now, both women who had carried life into the world, and surely that counted for something. It counted for nothing. It only gave the Sundays new material. Now she had an entire second subject, everything I was doing wrong with Samuel. How I held him, how I nursed him, how I dressed him. By the time he was 3 months old, she had told me 147 times that I was raising him incorrectly. I know the number because I started keeping it, sitting at her table, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. Each correction became a tally mark. Each Sunday, another column in a ledger I kept only in my head. Counting was the one thing that kept me tethered to my own body instead of floating somewhere above it. Here is something it took me decades to fully understand. Lydia was not a monster. She was a woman shaped by the identical hand she now used on me. 40 years earlier, she had sat at her own mother-in-law's table on her own Sunday afternoons, keeping her own ledger, enduring her own ritual. The pattern hadn't begun with her. And it wouldn't end with her, not unless someone somewhere refused to pass it forward. And for a long time, no one ever did. It moved from mother-in-law to daughter-in-law like a recipe copied down in a language nobody thought to question. In our community, none of this registered as cruelty. It was called formation. The older woman was shaping the younger one into a proper Amish wife. The slapped wrist, the hours of correction, the hands combing through your hair, the kneeling on hard floors, all of it was understood as love. A hard love, but love preparation for a harder life still ahead. To resist the shaping was to reject the whole community. To question it at all was Hochmut, always pride. Pride was the trapdoor sitting beneath every Amish woman's feet, and the older women held the latch. By my 7th year, something in me started to give way. Not with any noise, quietly, the way a piece of pottery cracks after too many cycles of heat and cold. I began forgetting small things. Where I'd set the broom down, what day it was, the names of my own cousins. I'd catch myself standing in the middle of my kitchen holding a wet rag. No memory of what I'd meant to clean. Eli noticed and asked if I was sick. I told him I was tired. Tired was the only word I had for it. By the 9th year, I'd started brewing ginger tea before every Sunday visit. Not really for my stomach, though it helped that too. But because the cup gave my hands something to hold. Because the warmth of it was something I could actually feel that belonged to me and not to Lydia's fingers. I would wrap both hands around it, sip slowly and tell myself, "You are still in here, you are still Anna. She hasn't taken all of it yet." In the 11th year, Lydia fell ill, a fever that kept her bedridden for 9 days in the Grostadi house. I was the one who carried her broth, who changed her sheets, who bathed her, because that is simply what a daughter-in-law did. I did it in silence, wearing the same still face I'd learned at her table. On the 7th day, while I wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, she opened her eyes and looked at me, and for the first time in 11 years I saw something unfamiliar cross her face. Fear. She was 81 and afraid she was dying, and the only person in the room to hold her hand was the young woman she had spent 11 years dismantling. She never apologized, not once, but she squeezed my hand just that once and whispered, "Du bist gut. You are good." Then she closed her eyes again. She recovered. The following Sunday she struck my wrist for cutting the bread wrong. That moment in the sick room was never mentioned again by either of us. In the 12th year, Lydia died in her sleep, a stroke. Eli found her in the morning. The funeral came 3 days later, and I wore the black dress I'd kept folded in the cedar chest for exactly this occasion. I'd sewn it in secret when I was 24. Some part of me already knowing I'd need it eventually, already wanting something at that funeral that was mine. Something she'd had no hand in. Nothing she had ever corrected. At the service, my own mother held my arm, looked at me with eyes that had clearly seen everything, and said nothing at first. Then she leaned close and whispered, in Pennsylvania Dutch, "Es ist vorbei." It is over. And I understood in that moment that she had known. All 12 years she had known. Every mother in that community had known. Each of them had once sat at her own kitchen table, kept her own private ledger. Their silence hadn't been ignorance, it had been a kind of complicity. And I believe now it was also the only form of mercy they knew how to offer, to say nothing, and let each woman carry her years alone, exactly as they had carried theirs. I remained an Amish wife for 29 more years after Lydia's death. I raised 5 children. I buried Eli when I was 58. And at 60, once my youngest daughter had married and moved on, I left the community for good. I left because I had spent 41 years being shaped entirely by other people's hands, and before I died, I wanted to find out what my own hands were capable of when nobody was watching. The shunning came immediately, my letters came back unopened, my grandchildren were told to pass me on the street without a word. My name was struck from the family Bible, the way names are struck in that world. I'd known it was coming, I'd been tallying that cost in my private ledger for years. I want to tell you what an English therapist once asked me, when I was 72 after we'd worked together nearly a decade. Slowly, the way old women piece together a quilt. She asked what I would say to the 19-year-old girl sitting at Lydia's table that very first Sunday. I thought about it for a long while before I answered. I told her I would say, the slaps were never love. The hours of correction were never love. The hands in your hair were never formation. What she gave you was inheritance, and inheritance is not the same thing as love. You're allowed to set it down. You're allowed to be the woman who breaks the chain instead of passing it on. I had 4 daughters-in-law of my own before I left that world. I want you to know, I never struck one of them. I never made a single one kneel. I never combed anyone's hair while reciting her failures back to her. When they came to my kitchen on Sundays, I poured coffee and asked about their gardens, their husbands, their own private dreams. I asked what they wanted. Not one of them had ever been asked that question before in her life. I watched them struggle to find an answer, watched them not quite know how, and I understood, this is the one thing I actually have the power to do. I cannot return the years that were taken from me, but I can refuse to take a single year from them. The chain broke quietly in my kitchen, over coffee, with no one even noticing it happen. If you grew up somewhere that called cruelty by the name of formation, I see you. If you ever sat at someone's table counting corrections silently while keeping your face perfectly still, I see you too. If what you inherited was a heavy thing, pressed into your hands by a woman who once had it pressed into hers the same way, you're not alone in that, and you're allowed even now, at any age, to finally set it down. If this stayed with you, tell me in the comments, what part of it you're still carrying. Tell me about the older woman in your own life if you had one. And if you want more stories from behind the prayer cap, from a woman who lived a long life inside that world before she finally stepped out of it, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There's still so much I haven't said. Until next time, remember, the chain ends with whoever finally decides it ends. Let it be you.